And we are recording.
And unmute myself. Okay. Okay, so this session, of course, as John has already mentioned, is all about Canvas quizzes. And what we're going to focus on with this session is how you create different tests and quizzes, how you choose the settings that are appropriate for your application of.
Oops, sorry, Quelly. Hang on. Unmute.
Thank you, John.
Sorry about that.
That is fine. So I was just saying we are going to focus on how you create tests, how you create questions, some of the different options for settings, and adding to the test to your different course areas. As John always says, put your questions in the chat. Feel free to ask us to show something again. We have no problem demoing something over again or doing it a little slower. And at the end, if you have specific questions, we will take the time to answer those. So I'm going to start here in my Canvas course, and I'm actually in the quizzes area. So anytime that you want to start building an exam, a quiz, a survey that you want to administer online in your Canvas course, you start here in the quizzes tool. I wish it had a better name, but yes, you can use quizzes to build exams and surveys as well as quizzes in Canvas. And when you're on the quizzes page, just like in other areas of Canvas, when you want to create a new quiz, there's a button at the top right with the little plus sign in front of it. And that's what you would click to add a new quiz to Canvas. And when we talk about adding a quiz to Canvas, we kind of want to start by what kind of quiz do you want to create? The first type of quiz that you can create is a graded quiz, and that really is the most common quiz that you're going to create in Canvas. When you create a graded quiz, Canvas is going to automatically add a column to your gradebook for that particular quiz you are building. And once a student takes that quiz, certain question types will be automatically graded, and the grade will be stored in that column in your gradebook. For the other questions that are not automatically graded, you do have the ability to go in and review student submissions and manually assign scores to things like essay question types or short answer questions where Canvas is not automatically grading those. The second type of quiz that you can create is called a practice quiz. And you might want to use a practice quiz when you want students to kind of test themselves and how well they're understanding the course material. Grades are not recorded for students for practice quizzes, even though they are able to see quiz results. So they would see how many points they earned when taking that quiz to kind of give them a visual for how many questions they got right or wrong. Practice quizzes are not added to the gradebook, and they also do not appear in that list of at the bottom of the course syllabus and the course summary where certain assignments and exams and discussions are listed. Practice quizzes do not show up there. The third type of quiz you can create is a graded survey. And so the graded survey allows you to give students points for completing the survey, but it is not grading it for right or wrong answers. So they are basically just getting credit for selecting and responding to that particular survey, not for the answers that they are selecting. You do have the option to allow anonymous submissions to graded surveys. So students do not have to be identified with their responses for a graded survey. And the last type of quiz that you can create is an ungraded survey. So it's just like a graded survey, except students don't get points for completing it. Again, you have the ability to make responses anonymous. And just like the practice quiz, the ungraded survey does not appear in the gradebook or in the course summary at the bottom of the syllabus. So when you're creating a quiz, and we start off on this quiz details tab, the first thing you always want to do is you always want to give the quiz a name. It doesn't matter if this is chapter 1, exam 1, practice quiz 2. You just want to give the quiz a name. Then just like for assignments and discussions and pages and announcements, you have a text area where you can provide the quiz instructions. You can format these instructions with images, videos, math equations. There's even the access to the record upload media that we've talked about in several other sessions, where you can record a video introduction to the quiz, where you remind students what the parameters are, what they should be doing, what the exam is covering. So again, your instructions will go here. As we scroll down the screen, I just talked about the different types of quizzes that you can create, and that first drop down is where you are going to specify to Canvas what kind of quiz this is. So if this is going to be a graded quiz and you want this to show up in the grade book and students to get credit for that, you're going to leave it set to the default of graded quiz. But if this was a practice quiz, you would select practice or one of the survey options. So I'm going to leave it set to graded quiz. If you have assignment groups created because you are doing weighted grading in Canvas, which is a topic we covered in the gradebook as well as the assignment session, you may have assignment groups that you can choose from here. So I'm just going to specify that this particular quiz should go into the exams assignment group. And then we are down to the section of options that are available for a quiz. And quizzes have several different options, as you can see. The first one is shuffle answers. And what this allows you to do is randomize the answer choices that are going to be displayed to students. So if you are creating multiple choice type questions or multiple answer type questions, this will shuffle those answers so that even if students are looking at the same question, their A, B, C, D will be in a different order. If your answer choices include things like all of the above or all of the below, you may not want to select this option because it could confuse students when those choices get shuffled around. So if you are going to shuffle answers, you want to make sure you're not using those particular answer choices for students. So again, shuffle answers will randomize those A, B, C, D choices for each student. Time limit. If you want to specify how much time each student has to complete a quiz, you want to enable the time limit check and specify to Canvas how much time a student has. And you're going to enter that time in minutes. So is it going to be 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 90 minutes or something less? You decide, and then you would enter that time limit in the text area here. Multiple attempts. Now, for most purposes, students would only get one attempt at an exam, especially a graded exam. But if you are setting this up as a practice exam and you want students to have as many attempts as they'd like to check themselves and make sure they're mastering the content, you can specify multiple attempts. If you choose the multiple attempt checkbox, you have a couple of different options that will be displayed for you. Canvas wants to know if it's a graded quiz, what score should it keep? Is it going to keep the highest score that a student has achieved? Will it take the latest score, whether it's higher or not, or will it average all of the attempts together and display that in the grade book? So you can choose one of the options from that drop-down list, and then you can specify how many attempts students are allowed. So if I say they get 1 or 3 or 4, I want to limit it to that, then I would select that. If I don't select that, then they're basically going to have unlimited attempts at that particular exam. So any questions about those first set of options? Okay. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit more, and we're going to talk about the options that are available in this responses section. And so the default is that all students will be able to see their quiz responses once they've submitted their exam. And what that does is when students go in and they view their graded submission, Canvas will show them what they answered. It will show them any automatic feedback that you've specified. So if you've entered feedback that they should see if they get a question wrong, that would be displayed to them. If you've specified feedback that they should see for correct answers, they will see that as well. And it will also let them know whether or not they've gotten the question right or wrong. Okay, so Canvas will let them know at a glance if they got the question right or wrong. You can choose to limit students' ability to see their responses to once after each attempt. So if you only want them to be able to see this information as soon as they've submitted once, then you could enable that checkbox. If you want to allow them to come back and review their submissions throughout the semester, then you would leave that checkbox off, okay? And then this checkbox is really whether you want students to be able to see what the correct answers are for that particular exam. So if a student got it wrong, allowing this checkbox on will show them what the correct answer was for that particular question. So it's basically allowing them to see the answer key once they've submitted and their submission has been graded. If you don't want students to be able to see that, then you can turn that checkbox off. Okay, so that is not a required field. It is an option that you can turn on and off. If you would like them to be able to see what the correct answers were, you have the ability to set a date. So if you say, okay, sure, I'd like them to have access to the answer key, but they shouldn't be able to see it until next week on the 3rd. You can also specify that as well. The hide correct answers allows you to limit how much time students have to review those answers. So if you want to give them a couple of days, you can say they can see the correct answers beginning August 3rd, but on August 7th, I'm going to hide them again. So you have some flexibility here with how much time students have to view the correct answers if you are going to enable that setting for an exam. Okay. As I scroll down, you'll see that there is an option here to show questions one at a time. And so if you want to limit students to one question on the screen at a time, you can do that by enabling that checkbox. And you can also lock questions. So once a student has answered a question and moved to the next one, if you choose lock, it prevents them from going back to review that question or change that answer. If you want students to be able to see all questions on the screen at once, then you would just simply leave that checkbox off. Okay. There might be some specific situations where you can use the options available in the quiz restrictions section. So for example, if you have students who are taking a quiz from a specific computer lab on campus, you can filter by IP address so that only students accessing from that particular IP address are able to access the exam. And again, that would only work if they're all taking it on campus in a computer lab all at the same time. You can also require an access code, and that is something like if someone else is proctoring an exam for you and they're providing that passcode in the classroom at the time of the exam, or if you are posting an announcement the day of at the start time for the exam with that access code, and only the students who receive it would be able to get in and take the exam, you can turn these on. I kind of recommend not using these options. Students are already authenticating to log into Canvas itself. Only students who are registered for your course have access to it. Sometimes adding some of these options add a layer of difficulty, which incites panic and lots of emails and panicked phone calls from students to faculty about the passcode isn't working, I can't get in to take the exam. And so I don't necessarily recommend the use of those restrictions. I just like to point out what they are and when you might want to use them. Any questions about those? Okay. And so we'll get to this last set of options, which are the assign options. And this is about who has access to the exam, when they have access to it, when is it due, when is it available. And so just like for assignments and discussions, the default is that every student has the ability to access the exam as you're creating it. If I want to add a due date, which would automatically add this to the calendar and trigger notifications reminding students to complete the exam by the due date, I would select the date from the due date calendar icon here. I can also specify a time. So if I want to say 6 p.m., I can absolutely change that to 6 p.m. If I want to control students' access to the link completely, I can say that the exam is only available on the 31st from 10 a.m. and at 6 p.m. the link is no longer available to anyone. So again, I generally use just the due date. I don't necessarily add the available from and the available until, but if you have a need for that, you can feel free to use. What's also nice is if you have students who need to take the exam at a different time, I don't have to create a different copy of this exam for those students. I can use this add button here at the bottom of the assigned options to assign this exam to a different student on a different date. So if this particular student needs to take the exam Monday, then I can set that due date and that time just for that student, but everybody else will still have the original due date of the 31st. So no need to create a separate copy of this exam. You can just use this add button to add as many combinations of dates and times that you need to accommodate student requests and needs. Okay, I'm going to scroll all the way back up and just again remind you that this is the details tab. So this is the tab that you see when you first create a quiz, and this is where again you're going to specify the quiz name, the instructions, the type, and then the different settings that you have. So that's the first step in creating this quiz. The second step is to actually add questions to it. And so you'll see at the top there is a second tab called questions. So before you save this exam and navigate away from it, you want to click that tab so that you can start adding the questions to it that you need students to be able to answer. And when you're adding questions to a quiz in Canvas, you have a couple of different options. And so you'll see there are 3 buttons here. First button is to add a new question. And so this is how you add questions individually to an exam. And so when you add questions using that first button, every student will get all of those questions in exactly the order that you add them. And so I'm going to click new question. And you'll see that it gives me the new question options. I can give a question title. And this is not required, but later if you're searching for questions in the question bank, it might be nice to maybe title questions based on the topic that the question is covering, so that later if you're searching the bank and you want to find questions that are all related to a certain topic or a certain chapter, it might be helpful to have that information in the question title. So again, you can enter the topic or the chapter or whatever it is that helps you identify the question. And then we have a drop down where you're going to choose the question type that you want to create for this particular question. You have multiple choice, which allows you to specify answer choices that students will be selecting from. And for multiple choice, there is one correct answer that is specified. You have multiple answer, which is similar to multiple choice, but it allows you to specify that there's more than one correct answer choice that students need to select. We have true, false, fill in the blank, fill in multiple blanks. You can also create multiple drop downs as well as matching. There are numerical answer type questions and formula questions where you can build questions that require students to do calculations and build formulas, and it will fill in a range of variables and values that you would specify when building those questions. You also have the ability to create an essay question. So if you want students to be able to give you a paragraph type answer or an essay question that you want them to type, you would select that option. All of the question types that we mentioned except for essay will be auto-graded by Canvas. So when you create those questions, you are specifying what the correct answer is. And when a student submits their quiz submission, Canvas will auto grade based on the key that you create as you're developing those questions. Essay questions can be manually, and I shouldn't say can be, have to be manually graded by the instructor. You also have the ability to create a file upload question. So if you require students to download a spreadsheet and complete something in that spreadsheet and submit it back to you, you can allow that by creating a file upload question in Canvas. And again, that question type would require manual grading as well. The last option is text no question. So if you have a question where you give them a scenario and then there are 5 questions that follow, you would use the text no question to set that up so that you can include the scenario or the case in the text area and then create the questions that follow that students need to answer. I'm going to select multiple choice. At the top right corner is the point field. This is where you need to tell Canvas how many points this question is worth. So if this is a 10-point question, you simply type 10 points in. If it's a 1-point question, you type 1. As you create each question, you have the ability to specify the point value for that question. The next field that you're going to fill in is the question field. And you're either going to type your question directly in. If you are recreating an exam that exists in Word or some other format, this is where you're going to be doing a lot of copying and pasting. It is a tedious process. There is no easy conversion tool that allows you to take that Word document and have it be created in Canvas as the right question types. It is basically opening up that Word exam in one window and opening up Canvas in another and doing a lot of copying and pasting. So you're going to either type your question or copy and paste it here. Just like anywhere else in Canvas where you have access to the rich content editor, you are able to format your questions. So you can include video, you can include links, you can include images. So if students need to look at an image and answer questions based on that image, you have the ability to embed an image. All of the options that you have available with the rich content editor are available here when creating quiz questions. And then you have the list of answers. So you type in the text that you want to appear for students to choose from. And then you'll notice that there is an arrow that says correct answer. It will always be located by default with the very first answer option that is entered. So when you're creating your quiz, sometimes it goes a whole lot faster if you always remember to enter in the correct answer first so that it automatically is designated as the correct answer. But if you've entered it in a different order and you need to select answer C as the answer, then you simply run your mouse over that answer choice. The arrow will appear to the left, and when I click on it, it now has identified that answer choice as the correct answer. So again, you can run your mouse and say, whoops, nope, it should have been B. And now I've switched it to identify B as the correct answer. So you're going to create type in your answer, your question text, type in your answer options, and you're going to specify what the correct answer is. If you need more than 4, there's a little link at the bottom of the last answer option that allows you to add another answer choice. So if you need it to display 6, you simply click that link twice to add the additional answer option fields. If you don't need them, again, anytime I hover over those, the menu appears in the top right corner. I can delete that answer. And again, I can delete that answer. Questions about adding that question really quickly? No, we're good? Okay. You'll notice for each answer, there's this color-coded box that appears. If the answer is wrong, the box is kind of bordered in this reddish color. When the answer is correct, the box is bordered in green. That's where you have the ability to specify feedback. So if you want students to see why this answer is wrong and where they should look for the correct one, you can specify what feedback you want them to see. And when I click done, it lets me see that students will see this particular feedback if they choose this incorrect answer. So you can specify feedback for incorrect answers. And I'm just going to click done. And again, I'm going to click done. You can also specify feedback for correct answers if you have a need for that. And then there is general feedback that you can specify for the question as a whole. So if a student got the question wrong and you want to give them some information that explains to them where they should have looked or why this answer is wrong, you can do that overall for a wrong answer to a question. Questions about giving feedback. That can be kind of tedious, but it is something that is helpful if you're using this for practice quizzing in Canvas, because when a student is doing this to check their knowledge and make sure they've understood, and if they've got it wrong and you're giving them feedback, telling them where they can look for the right answer, it kind of helps them guide themselves and find the answers that they're looking for, especially for those practice type quizzes that you might be creating. The very last step, so after you've selected your question type, you've specified the point value, you've created your question, saving the question is hitting this update question button. Once I click update question, the question has been created and it's been added to my exam. Once a question has been added, I can edit the question by clicking the pencil icon that's in the top right corner, or I can delete a question from an exam by clicking the X. Okay. I'm just going to do that one more time. I'm going to click add new question. This time I'm going to say true, false. Again, I'm going to put in a point value. This time I'm only want 5 points for this question. Question is, and then I'm going to select false as the correct answer and hit update question. So building a quiz using the new question option is just that repetitive process. You add the new question, you select your question type, you fill in the required values, and then you save. Once the questions have been added, you can rearrange and reorder the questions by clicking the dots in the top right corner and dragging questions up or down in the list. Whatever order you arrange them in is the order in which they will be displayed to students. So whatever order you put them in is how it will show up for each and every student who is taking that particular exam. Okay. Another way that you can add questions is you can find questions that may already exist in a question bank. So if you have created quizzes in other courses and you have stored those questions in a question bank, you may have also imported content from a publisher. So if you have imported a question bank from a publisher for a text that you're using, those questions will be stored in a question bank. Instead of creating the questions from scratch using the new question button, you can use the third button, which is find questions. When I click find questions, it opens up the find options. And what it gives me access to are all of the different banks that I have created in other courses that I'm teaching, as well as this course. And so if I click on, let's find the syllabus quiz. All of the questions that are in that particular quiz are listed, and I can simply say I want to add these 3 questions by scrolling through the list and putting a check next to the questions that I want to use. And then down at the bottom, I'm just going to click add questions. And you'll see that it automatically adds those 3 questions directly to the exam I was building. So again, I can find questions. I can search through the different exams and banks that I have access to. And once I find the question that I want to use, I simply put a check next to it and say add questions. Again, it is adding questions individually to the exam, so it will display it in the order in which it is listed on my screen to each student. Any questions about that? Okay. So the third option that we haven't talked about yet is new question group. And this is the option that you want to use if you are interested in randomizing the questions themselves.
I'm sorry,
So,
Bradley,
go ahead.
before we go down that next rabbit hole, can we just go back to talk about find questions a little bit more in depth? Because I've gotten a few questions all of a sudden. So Quinn had a question on how will we make sure the questions are loading into the question bank, which I'm actually going to see if I can unmute you really quick because I didn't quite get that question, but somebody else just asked the same one. So I don't know what you guys mean.
So my question was, as Quelly just went through the example of creating questions, does that automatically mean all those questions have gone into the question bank? And so if I went to another quiz, it'll be when I go click on find questions, they'll all be there, or do I have?
Unfortunately, no. Yeah, there's an extra. There's an extra step, and I want to save that for later.
Cool, no, that's fine.
Yeah, that you have to follow when you're manually creating questions to make sure they get added to a bank. If you are importing questions from a publisher, those automatically go into a bank that you can choose from.
Cool. So for those who are asking about how do we create the banks, we'll come back to that when we go back to Quinn's other question. So thanks, guys. Thanks, Riley.
Yep. Okay. So the last option for adding questions is to use this middle button, which is new question group. And this is when you want to randomize your questions. So for example, you have a bunch of 20 questions and you want Canvas to choose 10 of them. And so you want every student to get a different combination of these 10 questions from this 20 that you're going to create. This does a couple of things. It helps to make the exam a little bit more secure in that students don't have the exact same exam, so they can't say to each other, the answer to number 1 is C, because everybody will potentially have a different number 1 and a different number 2. And it allows you to just give students a different version of the exam, but with control. So you're creating the questions so you know that the difficulty level is all about the same, and yet you're making sure that as they're working online from home, they're not sitting together just giving everybody the correct answers to the questions as they work through them. So to create a question group, you click New Question Group. The default name that it gives it is group. You can change the name of this to whatever you want. What I have seen some instructors do is they will build a group for each chapter that they are creating questions for. So they're going to pick 5 questions from the chapter 1 group and 4 questions from the chapter 2 group, and so that they can get a balanced mixed exam based on the questions that they're building. I'm just going to call this sample group. And then you need to tell Canvas how many questions it's going to be choosing from this group. So if you know that you want it to pick 5 questions, you would enter 5. And then you have to tell Canvas how many points each one of these questions is worth. So this is going to be, each one of these is worth 15 points. You can link to a question bank. I'm not going to do that at this point. I am going to go ahead and create the group. And now that the group is here, I actually have to start adding questions to it so that it has something to choose from. You can move questions that you've added individually to an exam into a group. So if instead of every student getting the same 10 in the order in which you put it in, you can move those questions into the group. And I did that just by dragging and dropping the questions that I had already created into the group. And again, it's a pretty quick process, nothing too tedious. Okay. I'm gonna going. Once I've added at least 5 questions, that little alert message that it was showing me that I've specified more questions than I'd added will go away automatically because it recognizes that there are now enough questions to choose from. And so what this means is Canvas will pick 5 questions from any of the questions that I've added to this particular group so that students will get a different combination of questions. To add a question directly to this particular group from scratch, there at the top right corner is a plus sign. And when I click that plus sign, it gives me access to the same menu that we saw before, where I select the question type, type in the question itself, and again, specifying what the right answer is before saving. Okay. If we go back up to the top, the edit button is this little pencil icon. So if I want to change this and say instead of picking 5 questions, I want to pick 3 instead, or they should be worth 20 points, I can make those changes and update the group. And if I need to get rid of the group completely, I can hit the trash can and it would get rid of that group completely. Do that carefully so you don't lose your questions that you might have added to it. Because there really isn't an undo button for that. So once those questions are gone, if you haven't stored them in the question bank, you are basically recreating those from scratch. And then the first arrow will just collapse the group so that you're not looking at all of the questions listed at all times. I'm going to go ahead and save and pause and ask if there are any questions about groups that we can go over really quickly. We good, John? Okay. So I saved my quiz. I did not publish it. And in the Canvas world, anything that is not published is not available to a student. So if you are building a quiz and you're working on it and you want to make sure students don't have access to it before you want them to, just remember to save and not save and publish. It does warn you that the quiz is unpublished and that you are the only one who can see it. Once you've saved the quiz, it will show you a summary screen which lets you see the instructions you've created, the type of quiz you've created, along with the points and all of the other settings that you've specified, when it's due and who it's available to and when, based on the settings that you selected. You'll notice there's a preview button that's available to you at the top of the page as well as here at the bottom. So if you wanted to have the ability to see what this exam is going to look like to students, you can click either of those buttons. And it will take you into the quiz preview and show you exactly how it will display to students. The questions are delivered. You can actually select the answers and take the exam if you'd like. And you have the ability to submit, which means you're submitting from the student perspective. I can go back into editing either by clicking the Keep Editing This Quiz link or by clicking the Edit button at the top right. And that allows me to go right back into either the details area or the questions area to make changes to the exam. I'm just going to pick a question. To edit any question, again, you're going to look for the pencil icon that appears in the top right corner anytime you run your mouse over a question. And there are options for embedding images that I just wanted to point out really quickly, available to you right in the Rich Content Editor toolbar. You can either upload from a URL. If you have images that already exist Canvas, you can select from those images and it adds the image right into the question itself. So it is really simple to add an image for students to review. From the external tool dropdown, if you have recorded video that they need to review to answer the question, whether it's video you've created yourself and stored in Illumira, or if it's a library video resource that is stored in Illumira, if it's YouTube content, you can do that as well. If you have content in Google that you need to share with students for completing this particular quiz question, you can link to that as well. And the other option is you can use the record upload media to record video on the fly. So if you wanted to give them some clarifications about a question or some explanations to help them answer, you can do that as well. Once you've made changes to a question, you simply make sure to click update so that those changes are reflected. Questions about any of that? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit save and publish. When I hit save and publish, it makes the exam available based on the settings you selected. So according to my settings, it will be available to everybody starting the 31st, this particular exam. So even though it is published, I can still control their access by using those available from and available until dates. I still have access to my preview. So again, if I want to go in and take a look at this from the student perspective, I can. We still have access to edit. So if I want to go in and make changes, and you can make changes to this exam all the way up until students start taking. You can even make changes after students have taken the exam. Just keep in mind that if you do change certain questions after a student has taken and submitted, it does not change the view of the exam that they had. What they had was that version that they took prior to the changes. So if you've got to make changes, you want to do that before students go in and take the exam. And then you also have options that are available from the very last button on the right. You can attach rubrics to an exam. So if you are going to use a rubric to grade those essay questions, you can attach the rubric to the exam so that students have the ability to review that prior to taking. If you want to lock a quiz, it's over. You want to make sure no students are going to be able to access going forward. You have the ability to lock a quiz from this menu. If students have started taking the exam, you can also look at results from this particular menu. And then there are some options like message students who, if you want to message students who haven't taken it yet to remind them that a due date is quickly approaching and the exam is going to close, you can do that from this menu. If you need to get rid of an exam completely, you can delete. And then you can share copies of the exam with other Canvas users here at Rider, as well as copy an exam from one course to another using the copy to options that are here. At the far right, you have the Moderate This Quiz link, as well as the Speedgrader link. Moderate This Quiz allows you to see the list of students in the course, whether or not they are in an attempt, whether their attempt has been completed, when that was completed, how much time they took to complete. For exams that are auto-graded, you'll be able to see the score here. And what I also like to remind instructors is that if you have students that require extra time for exams or extra attempts, they have accommodations, written accommodations from the Student Accessibility Services. It's SAS. I never can remember all of the words in that department's title. If you've been notified that a student requires extra time, you will be able to set those options from this Moderate Quiz screen. So for example, if this particular student requires an extra 30 minutes for exams, I can select that student from the list, click the pencil icon to the far right, and then for every attempt, I can say that this student gets an extra 30 minutes. And when I click save, it lets me know at a glance that that particular student has now been set up to be allowed the extra 30 minutes they are allowed for that attempt. Thing to keep in mind, if you have students who require extra time for an attempt, you want to make sure that your quiz window is long enough to allow for that extra 30 minutes. So if you have a quiz window that you set to an hour, and you're telling students they get 60 minutes, this student would actually get 90. So if you only allow a 60-minute window, it would close and prevent this student from having that extra 30 minutes. So you want to make sure that your window of time, if you're using the available from and available until options to control that window, that it is set to allow for any students who need the extra time or accommodations for an exam. I'm going to click the exam 1 link to get back to this window. And then we're going to head over to Speedgrader. Speedgrader is where you would go to review student submissions. If you were set up to allow essay type questions or file upload questions, this is also where you would go to review those submissions and manually score those questions for a student. Okay. Go back to exam 1, and then I'll go back to quizzes. And I'm just going to open up this sample quiz here and go in to moderate this quiz, just to give you an idea of what it would look like if you have a student who has actually attempted. It would give you the time they took as well as that score. And if I go back in and I go into Speedgrader, I can actually go down and view the actual submission for that student. Another thing to keep in mind, even though Canvas will auto-grade those multiple choice type questions, those true-false questions, if you feel like you have to overwrite or override a score that Canvas has given a student or not given a student, you always have the ability as the instructor to make changes to the value of points that has been assigned. If you need to make any changes, it allows you to do that. And you can also update scores so that the new score you assign will be reflected in the gradebook. Okay, any questions about what we see in the Speedgrader?
So a couple of questions that came in about getting the extra time.
Okay.
So I think there's confusion when we were doing the setting a different assignment kind of due date versus giving extra time and how the entire time gets added up, basically. Could you just show that step by step one more time, Corelli?
Sure. So we'll start out, I'll edit. So we'll start here with the assign section. So the available from and the available until is how you control the window of time that is open to a student to take an exam. So if you know that you want students, if you are trying to kind of mimic what you would do in the classroom where students have basically a classroom period to complete an exam, you can absolutely say that the exam is only available today from 2 o'clock until 3:30. Okay, and that allows you to specify how long the link should be available to students in Canvas. So beginning at 2 p.m., students are able to come in and click the link, and they would be able to come in and click that link and work on this exam until 3:30. The time limit.
Sorry,
just
to, go. Never mind.
Yeah, the time limit is different. The time limit is how much time they have to complete the exam once they click that button. So if you're saying it doesn't matter, I'm opening the exam from 2 to 3:30, but they should only have 30 minutes to complete the exam. That means once they come in and start that exam, their timer starts counting down and they have 30 minutes to complete it. I can come in as a student in your class at any time between 2 and 3:30 to start my exam, but once I start it, I only have 30 minutes to complete. The moderate is where you would say, I'm going to allow the extra time. And again, that would be for a student who has the accommodations that say that they require this extra time. And so again, that's done by going into moderate quiz. and it's selecting the student in question, clicking that pencil icon and saying, this student is allowed an extra 20 minutes on every exam, or in this case for this particular exam. And so what that means is that student has to come in between 2 and 3:30 just like everybody else. But instead of getting 30 minutes, that student is allowed 50 minutes to complete the exam. And only that student. Everybody else will get cut off at the 30-minute mark. That particular student will get the extra 20 minutes to complete.
Thank you, Riley. Perfect.
You're welcome. Other questions about that? But it's important that we make sure, if you have a student who is going to need the 50 minutes, that your window of time will allow them to do that. Because this available from and available till overrides every other setting that you set. Okay. And we've had that happen a couple of times, so we like to try to point that out. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about question banks. So this is the rabbit hole I almost don't want to go down. So I'm going to go back to quizzes, and I'm going to go to, well, let's go back to quizzes. So when you're on the quiz page, there's a button to the right of the Add Quiz button, the little dots. When you click that, you have the option to manage question banks. So you'll see that it created by default this unfiled questions bank. And if I open that up, it shows you the questions that I was creating as we played around today. So it adds those questions automatically into a bank called unfiled questions, which doesn't necessarily help us. So Quinn, for your purposes, if they all belong to chapter 1 or chapter 2, you would want to change the name of that bank to chapter 1. Okay, you have the ability to add additional question banks. So if I say create a new one and this is going to be chapter 2, I can create that as well. When I click on chapter 2, I can add questions here. And it's just like if I were adding them to an exam, except it is adding them directly to the question bank. So the question of what's simpler, if you know you want to be able to pull questions from banks as you're building your exams throughout the semester, or if you know you want to be able to pull from banks to build your final exam or your midterm exam, it sometimes is easier to add the questions directly to the bank first and then build your exams, than coming in and renaming and moving questions from unfiled and moving them into their correct locations. So again, you can add the question directly, and it functions exactly the same way as it does when you're building questions in exams. You add your text, you specify the answer choices. That's not spelled right. And then you specify the right answer by, again, hovering, clicking the arrow, and then saving the question by adding it there. When you're building in the question bank area, you actually get the option to move or copy questions to another bank. So if I want to say, you know, take this question from chapter 2, but also put it in a bank called final exam, you can do that as well. And I'm just going to say, do that. And then when I head back to question banks, you'll see it created a bank called final exam and also added that question here. So if you know that question banks is something that you want to make use of, I find it easier to work in the banks first, creating the banks to organize the questions, adding the questions that you need directly to the banks, and then coming back later to build the exams and linking to those question banks and pulling the questions from those question banks.
Really, can you go to an old class to make the banks, maybe off of a quiz that you had previously created?
You can, but it's not necessarily easy. When I have old exams, what I tend to do is make an export of a course and then import them again. And then I choose the import option that will create the banks, because otherwise you're manually copying and pasting questions. It's not a simple process for existing. Yeah, question banks can kind of be a rabbit hole. And the best way to create the bank, generally we'd have to look at the course itself to figure out, okay, do the questions exist in unfiled? Is it easier to move them from unfiled to a new bank in that course, or do we go the import-export route to create the banks? You're muted.
Yeah, while we're on the subject of banks, do you want to just do a quick demo of how we can import maybe a publisher's bank or a publisher's file?
I'll show you how it's done. We don't have an actual file.
Well, yeah, just go through the steps.
So if you have a publisher file, you're going to start by going into your course and going to settings, which is at the very bottom left. And then you're going to look on the right or at the bottom for the option to import course content. When you select import course content, you're going to click this drop-down list. You will either have a QTI zip file from the publisher or a Canvas course export package from the publisher. You may even have a format for a different LMS if the publisher doesn't have it created for the Canvas platform. If they do export using Blackboard or Desire to Learn or Moodle or Angel, you can also pull those in as well. So you would select the type of file that the publisher has provided. Again, the most common would be the QTI zip file or the Canvas export. And once you've selected one of those options, you would then browse to the file where you have it saved on your computer and select it. And then here is the option where you're going to say, create a new question bank. And so when it pulls those questions in, it will automatically store them in the new question banks based on the information in the import file. If there are multiple chapters, it will create a new bank for each chapter. So it will not just dump them all into one question bank. It will create a chapter 1, a chapter 2, a chapter 3 for as many chapters as exist in the file. And then the last step is to import. And when you do that, it will pull all of those questions in, store them in the banks, and you're then able to build your exams by selecting from the question banks.
And then finally, kind of just one last punch list item to get a little bit more granular with some of the questions that we had earlier. Can we go over the formula question type when we were looking at building quizzes? We have a few quantitative folks on the call today.
Okay, so let's go to exam 1, edit. We're going to head to questions. And then we're going to click new question. So from the drop down, you're going to select formula question. And then you can see at the top, there's text here that kind of explains the process of creating. So you enter your question, then you're going to build a formula and generate a set of possible answer combinations. So when students see the question, they get the question with randomly filled in variables, so that every student will get the question with the formula stays the same, but the variables in the formula were changed for each student. So for example, what is 5 plus x? And in the brackets is where, not that bracket, you're specifying the variables. So Canvas will replace that x with the different variables. You notice as soon as I enter that particular formula, Canvas says, so specify our variables here. What's the min? So I guess I want them to, the smallest variable should be 5, the largest would be 50. I can specify how many decimal places, and it will give like an example value, and I can say recompute, and it would do that. Then it says next you'll need to write the formula or formulas used to compute the correct answer. Just use the same variable names listed above. So if you use X when creating it, then when you specify the formula that is used to calculate the answer, make sure you use X in that variable, in that formula. And then when you hit save, you've created that. This is one of those, how do I put it? It exists, but it's a little clunky. And we find that it doesn't always necessarily allow you to build the formula that you're looking for. So in those cases, we say, talk to us about possible workarounds for creating what it is you want students to be able to compute and yeah.
Yeah, I would say probably the more like finite math courses were the ones where I think those were probably the only classes I saw work okay. Once you start into more sophisticated ones, it's not going to do what you want.
Not at all.
Usually.
Not at all. So there are limitations to this, especially depending on what your use case is.
Cool. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and allow you guys to unmute yourselves. And we'll move into just the regular general Q&A if there's anything in particular that you guys wanted to go over. I know this was a lot of info. As always, we will go ahead and make sure that everyone gets a copy of the recording today once it's finished rendering. And with that, if you don't have anything, have a great afternoon. But if you do, now's your time.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.